Some say it was bound to happen sooner than later. Others say it's a flash in the pan. Whatever the case, Google is refusing to budge from its position after the European Union imposed an eye-popping fine on the tech giant. Refuting the EU's contention of limiting options, a spokesperson for the company has said that Android creates more choices for its users and that the company is planning to appeal the penalty. Now, just yesterday, the EU slapped Google with a $5 billion fine. The EU's regulatory arm came to the decision after finding that Google manages Android in ways that illegally harm competition. Remember, 80% of the world's smartphones use Android technology. Now, the ruling focused on three practices that the company employs. One, the bundling of Google's Chrome web browser and its search app as a condition for licensing the Google Play Store. Two, payments that Google makes to phone manufacturers and telecom companies to exclusively pre-install the Google Search app on their devices. And three, Google's practice of prohibiting device makers from running Google apps on Android forks or alternative versions of the software unapproved by Google. In its ruling, the Commission ordered Google to stop all of these practices. The EU hit Google with a record antitrust fine for abusing the dominance of its Android mobile operating system. It ordered Google to put an end to illegal conduct within 90 days or else face additional charges of up to 5% of Alphabet's average daily worldwide revenue. The ruling comes a little over a year after the EU fined the company $2.7 billion for favoring its shopping service over competitors. This, of course, has set off quite a storm of words. US President Donald Trump has lashed out after Brussels hit the US tech giant Google with a record fine. Trump warned that he will no longer allow Europe to take what he calls an advantage of the US. In his latest tweet, I should say, Mr. Trump said, I quote, "I told you so. The European Union just slapped a $5 billion fine on one of our great companies, Google. They truly have taken advantage of the US, but not for long." End quote. And earlier we spoke with Jack Parrick, our correspondent in Brussels, on what other companies might be in the EU's firing line after Google and why the EU has toughened up on tech companies of late. Here's what he told us.
Simply put, it's high turnover companies, big tech giants, market dominance for many of them, and so the European Union goes for the big bucks, which is what you'd expect. Perhaps smaller competition cases don't matter so much for the wider set of consumers. Now, the European Commissioner for Competition, Margrethe Vestager, says that she just follows the letter of the law when it comes to these cases, that she has no anti-US bias, as some have claimed. Interestingly, a delegation from Brussels is heading to the US to be hosted by US President Donald Trump at the White House. The EU delegation will include the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, the Trade Commissioner and a number of others. And this Google case may be something that's brought up there, considering the trade tariff spat that's been going on between the US and the European Union after Donald Trump imposed 10% tariffs on steel imports from the European Union and a number of other places, and the European Union retaliated with tariffs of their own on American products. The other tech giants that the EU's taken on are Apple. They've fined them for a massive $15 billion around for tax avoidance in Ireland that Apple has now started to repay. There was a case against Amazon as well regarding competition, regarding its power in the market regarding e-books. But really it's been Google that's been in the sights of the European Commission. Just over a year ago, Google was fined $2.8 billion for a similar case regarding competition, but it was to do with its shopping services. So essentially putting its own shopping possibilities at the top of any search engine results so that it would benefit from the shopping channels as well. So that was a big fine, but this one against Android is almost double that fine.
But let's dig a little further. Why exactly is this case so important to Google? Now, since its launch in 2007, Android has helped Google preserve its preeminence as consumers move from desktop computers to mobile devices. Now, more than half of the worldwide internet traffic is now on mobile phones, 80% of which runs on Android, providing a showcase for Google's services and mobile apps as well. Now, Google gives away Android and keeps it updated for free, covering its costs with the revenues made from people using those services. As a result of the EU's decision, Google will be expected to revise the terms of service that made this model viable, notably the guaranteed distribution of Google products. Such changes will leave Google with less control and will potentially open up opportunities for its rivals. I suppose the question at this point is, does Google have any wiggle room after the EU's diktat? If the appeal does not go through, Google will pay the fine and has 90 days to decide how to change its Android contracts to remove illegal provisions. The Commission will ultimately review whether the company's solution complies with its ruling or not. If the changes fall short, Google's parent company, that's Alphabet, could be liable for further fines of up to 5% of daily revenue. It's too early to tell how Android will change in Europe or beyond. Google might start to change a license fee to cover its, or rather charge a license fee to cover its software costs, and device suppliers might be given more freedom to develop their own versions of Android. Google could even mimic Apple and keep Android for use only in its own Pixel phones, although any changes are unlikely to be noticed by users for many months to come. In other news, Thailand's rescued cave boys woke up in their own homes for the first time in more than 3 weeks, and the first thing many of them did was take part in a religious ceremony. The boys and their families visited an ancient temple with scenic views of the surrounding countryside and prayed for good fortune. At home, the boys were greeted with hugs, tears and smiles from waiting relatives and friends when they got back. Others were blessed with water as they entered their homes for the first time in 3 long weeks. Right, on to a story that's been generating quite a bit of newsprint of late. Some have argued, how exactly does the US President Donald Trump think it's okay to slam Russia for interfering in the US presidential elections? The logic, because if the Russian meddling did in fact happen, it was Trump, after all, who seemed to benefit. Nonetheless, after many confusing and contradicting statements, the US President has said in a new interview that he does hold the Russian President responsible for interfering in the elections. So what does Putin have to say to that charge?
Мы видим, что в Соединенных Штатах есть силы, которые с легкостью готовы принести в жертву российско-американские отношения, в жертву своим амбициям в ходе внутриполитической борьбы.
Some might argue that with this statement, the Russian president is directly targeting Trump's opponents, which in itself is interference in the domestic affairs of the United States. But then others will say that the Russian president has every right to comment because, after all, he is trying to mend ties with the United States. And the next big question, what are these forces in the US that, according to Putin, have interest in sacrificing US-Russia ties? Both Trump and his opponents, the Democrats, will have to answer that question. The Chinese President Xi Jinping will leave for a tour of Africa and the Middle East or West Asia in what can be seen as Beijing's attempt to further cement its role as the region's closest economic and diplomatic ally. Mr. Xi will travel to the UAE, Senegal, Rwanda, South Africa and Mauritius, where China's economic clout and strategic ambitions are only growing by the year. Now, currently, Chinese money is funding a 1,400-kilometer-long railway line in Nigeria, a highway in Algeria, and new cities in Egypt and South Africa. This week's trip is likely an attempt to strengthen China's hold over the African continent, with Xi Jinping possibly offering further investment. However, with these deals also comes immense debt for these nations. Remember, China already owns more than a sixth of Africa's loans. Meanwhile, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is also set to travel East Africa or rather to East Africa, at the same time as President Xi. This could be because both India and China are well aware of the strategic significance of this region as an emerging market. The BRICS summit in South Africa later this month is likely to see a revving of India's rivalry with China for influence in resource-rich Africa. Official sources say that the Prime Minister is going to visit Rwanda and neighbouring Uganda on his way to South Africa for the BRICS summit, which starts July 25th. Mr. Modi will land in the Rwandan capital of Kigali a day or two after President Xi. He is expected to sign several agreements with both countries. And why not? India is looking to make headway in both countries where China has emerged as an important partner in post-conflict reconstruction work.